Hey gang, how's it going? In this video I thought we'd take a deep dive into some of the juicy details of my GAMSAT experience. We'll chat about how many times I sat the GAMSAT, how I prepared, and some little things I learned along the way. For those of you I haven't met before, my name's Adam, I'm a junior doctor from Australia, and I sat the GAMSAT a few years ago before getting into medical school, and since then I've been helping other students with their own GAMSAT attempts, tutoring, essay writing, that sort of thing. And this video will be a little bit different, a little bit more informal maybe. I'll try and give you my totally unfiltered opinion on my GAMSAT experience. But firstly, if you're preparing for the GAMSAT yourself, I just want to say I feel for you. It is a bit of a slog, it's a lot of hard work, and it's not the most fun experience, but you'll get there, Probably got a bunch of other things going in your life at the moment, uni, work, trying to keep on top of GAMSAT, trying to maintain a normal life, and on top of that having the pressure and the weight of all the expectation that you probably have on yourself of trying to get good marks and get into med school. I'm sorry I can't help with all of those feelings, but hopefully I can give you a little bit of an insight into my own experiences, and that might help shed some light on the light at the end of the tunnel. So let's start from the very beginning. Prior to studying medicine, I studied biomedical science. Like probably a lot of you guys, biomed seems like the default option for a lot of students who perhaps want to study medicine in the future or didn't get in as an undergraduate student. And as a result, there were loads of other kids studying biomed with me who are also sitting the GAMSAT and trying to get into medicine. And biomed itself was a little bit tricky. It probably wasn't the most clinical degrees, and med's very clinical. So I think people come into studying biomed with the expectation that it's going to be the most direct and most relevant pathway into medicine. In hindsight, I probably don't think that's necessarily true, because it doesn't really give you that same sort of clinical acumen that, you know, someone who might have studied nursing or pharmacy or physiotherapy beforehand might have given you. But I think from a science perspective, and I think certainly from a public health perspective, it did give me a fairly good grounding into medicine. But nevertheless, that's a topic for another video. Essentially, biomed's a 3-year degree, and your GAMSAT score, at least at the time, lasted for 2 years. So I sat my first GAMSAT attempt in my second year, or my penultimate year. So at the start of second year, I went ahead and I registered for the March sitting of the GAMSAT. And you know, I've mentioned in previous videos, exam time came around and I didn't really prepare well enough for that attempt. For some reason, I had this sort of lower sense of expectation on myself, because I still had a year after that to get a score that would hopefully get me into medicine the year after finishing my biomedical science degree. Bottom line is I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a plan going into it. I didn't have a plan how I was going to prepare, and even if I had an idea, I didn't really execute it. I went into that exam not feeling totally prepared, but just wanting to give it a crack and have that experience. And I know that there are probably going to be a bunch of you out there who are in the same position as I was. You know, for lack of a better term, and a lot of people say it, using it as a trial run. It's a bit of an expensive trial run. But anyway, I got results and they were okay, but definitely not enough to get me into medical school, and definitely not enough to at least be competitive necessarily. And I remember the day results coming out, and lots of biomed kids were looking at their phone, and I was at uni that day, and it was an intense experience. I remember being in a biomed lab, and you know, people running out of the lab to check their phones and check their results, and it's a really big deal. Yeah, and I was stoked for my friends that did do well that year, but I knew that I'd have to sit it another year. However naive that sort of thought process probably was at the time, but I went back to the drawing board and had another crack the next year in March. Now, I think I've said this before in my videos, and I'll say it again. I think it's important to sort of break the image or the expectation of what it looks like to get into medicine. Applications are very much a spectrum. There are people that have perfect GPAs and perfect GAMSAT scores and do really well in the interview, and they'll get into medicine. But then again, not everyone is that person. Not everyone is coming in on a 7.0 GPA and, you know, an 85 GAMSAT score and absolutely nails the interview. But if that isn't you, and chances are if you're applying for medicine, you're the kind of person that sets really high expectations for yourself, still don't count yourself out of the race, because not every person getting into medicine is that person. And sidestep kind of from the GAMSAT talk here, but I came into uni and saw a lot of people around me absolutely smashing, you know, their first and second year subjects, doing really well, and I just wasn't really getting the scores that I'd come to expect from myself. And this very much led to quite a bit of self-doubt. It made me reevaluate, you know, is biomed the right thing for me? Is medicine the right thing for me? I don't think too heavily. I think I always still had that drive to try and get into medicine and keep going, but it definitely put me down initially. So anyway, coming into final year, I had a bit more expectation on myself from a GPA perspective, and also from a GAMSAT perspective. I almost felt like my GAMSAT had to compensate in a way. But going back to the GAMSAT now, the thing about my first sitting is that I didn't have a plan. So I started with that. I started with a plan. I drew up a calendar, had my start date, and I had the date of the GAMSAT sitting. And I was like, we've got all this space in between. I had about 3 months over the summer period. And I said to myself, what are the things that I need to know? What are the things that I need to do in that time frame to get me as prepared as I can for the GAMSAT CE in March. So, I created a little bit of a curriculum for myself, breaking down each section, trying to figure out all the things that I need to know. In section 1, I need to learn about the strategy of answering the questions. I need to know the kind of questions that they're going to be asking. So I created a little bit of like a curriculum for myself almost. Section 2, how do I actually write an essay? What's the first thing I need to know about writing an essay? And then for me, it was about like repetition and trying to smash out as many essays as I can. And then for section 3, what's the knowledge base that I need to know here? Like, what are the sort of questions that they're going to be asking? I know it's about science, but what sort of sciences? Physics, biology, chemistry. What's the baseline curriculum that I need to learn to be able to answer these questions well? So I kind of bundled this rough plan all together, spoke to some friends who had sat the GAMSAT before, tried to get some study material from them and buy some study material online. I got those Des O'Neill books, which I spoke about before, which now are probably a little bit outdated, but I think even still they created a really good foundation for learning the things that I needed to know to feel prepared. And I guess that was a little bit of a risk that I took in terms of not buying one of those GAMSAT study packages, and we can talk a little bit more about that later, but it was very much self-directed and applied to my own discipline. So that was a little bit of an unknown, so to speak. And from my first attempt and reading a little bit about what the GAMSAT involves, there are a few things that I wanted to focus on. Firstly, the knowledge. I wanted to get a good grounding in the baseline knowledge that I needed to know to answer the questions, write a good essay, that sort of thing. Secondly, I wanted to know what kind of questions that they actually asked so that I could prepare effectively. I could do my reading, but then also do practice questions and circle back and kind of fill in the gaps in my knowledge. The third thing was timing. The GAMSAT is a time-pressured exam, and I know that people struggle generally to finish with timing. So I wanted to make sure that I was sitting practice exams to work on my timing, and that even when I was doing just practice questions alone, that I would try and build up and get to the point where I could answer the questions in a time that would allow me to finish the exam. And the last thing, which I think a lot of people don't really think about, is how you feel on exam day. And for me, having sat it before, that gave me a little bit of insight into what exam day actually looks like. And I knew from my experience that the emotions of the whole day, particularly when there's a lot of pressure on it, like I would be feeling in this second attempt, can really get the better of you. So for me, at least when I sat it, it was an in-person exam, paper-based. You'd rock up, there'd be thousands of people there. On top of that, you run into a lot of people that you know from university, friends and that sort of thing that are sitting in the exam as well. I try to keep pretty chill. I just want to talk about other things beside from the exam itself. And so that can all play into how you feel on exam day and I guess how you perform as well. So March came along and exam day hit. It was a Caulfield race course. As I said, there were loads of people there and I rocked up. I saw a few people I knew, said hi, whatever, but mostly just tried to keep to a small group and keep it really quiet. If you've ever sat a big exam before in a big room, you'll know how it feels. But to be honest, I actually felt pretty calm, unlike a lot of other exams that I'd sat in the past. I felt pretty relaxed and I think that had a lot to do with my preparation beforehand. And so yeah, in a way, when I sat down on that exam day, I felt like I had done it before. And then, the exam started. Section 1 was okay. I never really know how to feel with section 1. It can be a little bit of a mystery sometimes. You never really know what your scores are going to end up like. Section 2, the essay, I can't really remember what the essay topics were off the top of my head, but one thing I do remember is I got around to my second essay topic and I misread the clock or mistimed things or something like that. And I thought I had 10 minutes less than I actually had. So I ended up just absolutely rushing my guts out to try and finish the second essay in time. And then halfway through realizing that I actually had an additional 10 minutes to what I thought I had. So that was a bit of a rattling experience. And I think that threw me a little bit. And honestly, I came out of that essay section feeling a little bit disappointed because I knew that going into it, my essay was probably my strongest section. And I feel like I didn't necessarily perform to the best of my abilities. So that was a little bit frustrating, but to be honest, I got to the lunch break and I just chilled with a couple friends. We chatted a little bit, again, not GAMSAT related chat, just normal chat. Tried to chill, maybe listen to some music, I honestly can't remember. And then came back around for section 3, which was the science section, and it flew, I got through all the questions in time. I finished the exam, I walked out, and that was it. That was the GAMSAT. And all the preparation, and you finish the day and it's done. You're absolutely exhausted. I think I went home and probably had a nap, but I was completely cooked afterwards, that's for sure. And honestly, it's all a bit of an anticlimax because you finish the exam and you just want to know how you went straight away. When you're doing practice exams, you're used to sitting the exam and getting the results straight away, but now, you've got to wait another month or whatever to get your results. So that was a bit of an anxious wait. And so people have commented on my channel a few questions a little bit about GAMSAT preparation, and I thought I'd take this opportunity to answer them. So one question I've had is, how do I go about essay writing? So for me, I was pretty much starting from scratch in terms of GAMSAT essay writing. I'd done essays before in school. To be honest, the structure is very similar. You have that introduction, you have the 3 body paragraphs and a conclusion, but there is a particular style, I guess, in the GAMSAT essay, and knowing the difference between a task A and a task B essay is also important to writing a good GAMSAT essay. So I wanted to learn a bit more about that. For me, I read the Des O'Neill books. The essay book was actually pretty good. And basically, I just read as many free resources online as I could find. I know that Paging Doctor had a bunch of forums where people would post their essays and other members would leave feedback and comments and that sort of thing. And so I'd read through those and, take them with a grain of salt, knowing that they're just other students as well, but kind of seeing what the approach different people had was. There were Facebook groups. There was also a Facebook group for essay marking, similar to the Paging Doctor forum, which I also went on. And then just read a bunch of free content online to try and get a better understanding of what they're looking for in this essay. And once I had that, the only way to really learn and implement it all is to practice it. And so it was just repetition. I would essentially try and write an essay a day, at least not go 2 days without writing an essay. And when you get down to it and you get your timing right, it's only really half an hour to contribute to studying every day. So it's pretty doable, pretty achievable. And that was kind of my approach, I guess. In terms of my own study outside of writing essays, I try and get a bit of a bank of examples, historical examples, anecdotes, things that I could weave into my essays that I knew were kind of going to repeat themselves based on the different themes that would come up. But again, I've tried to kind of distill all that information, all I've learned, and the kind of structure and how I go about writing an essay into my GAMSAT essay study guide. So if you haven't seen that already, you can download it free in the description below. I'll put a link. And yeah, hopefully you find that helpful in your own GAMSAT essay preparation. Another question that people have asked me is, do I buy or pay for one of these GAMSAT study courses? And I think it's not a simple yes or no answer. I think for a lot of people, the expectation is that you get one of these courses, you participate in the course, and you get a good GAMSAT score. But I think there's a lot that goes into it that makes it not so simple, right? But I think there's a bit more to it than that. The curriculum that they provide in some of these courses can be really great. They can give you a really good foundation and outline, and it often involves sort of one-on-one and group tutoring sessions, which can be really helpful. But I don't think it replaces the study that you put in your own private time. So a lot of these courses you have to dedicate many hours to just for like the tutoring and just for the knowledge acquisition. But you still have to, as I said, write heaps of essays so you can get good at implementing the skills that you've learned. You still got to do practice questions and do reading in your own time. And again, so I don't think it replaces your own private study time. Take them with a grain of salt, but I do think they can be really helpful. They can be expensive. So I think weigh it up and see if it's something that works for you and if you think it'll be beneficial. And another person asked, how do you prepare for section 3 of the GAMSAT? So that's the sciences section. It's a good question. Surprisingly, section 3 was actually my best section in terms of the score that I got. And I say surprisingly because I think that despite doing a biomedical science degree, I never necessarily rated my science knowledge, but I do think the study that I put in gave me a really good foundation of the kind of things that they would ask in the GAMSAT. Having said that, if you don't come from a science background, I don't think that rules you out completely, and that's where having a good knowledge base and doing your own study comes in handy. As I said, I use the Des O'Neill books to get a good foundation of knowledge, and then I'd pretty much do practice questions, go through the answers, find knowledge gaps, go back to the book, study the parts that I felt like I needed work on. I remember for me, the physics style questions often throw people, and so when I'd get around to those questions, they'd kind of repeat themselves a little bit in the style of questions that they'd ask. So I'd learn that particular aspect, and then that would serve me for the next time that question popped up. And I remember the satisfaction actually in section 3 on my actual GAMSAT. A physics question had come up that I remember learning specifically, and I had no idea about how to answer that question before having prepared for the GAMSAT. But I came around to that question and I was able to answer it, and it was just super satisfying and rewarding knowing that I had learned that thing and it came up on the actual exam day. In terms of finding the material to know what kind of questions come up, look online, watch some videos on YouTube. There are some great YouTubers that make some good section 3 content. If you Google, there'll be some free resources online. Have a read through some of the notes that people have posted. Take a look at Paging Doctor as well. I think it's a really good site in terms of getting free resources and opinions and perspectives that people have posted on the different sections. That's probably how I'd approach it. So, scores. Eventually time came around, scores came out, and I was at home. It was a day off. I wasn't at uni that day, which was probably a blessing in disguise because I think, as I said before, what happened the previous year, I got an email that prompted a login onto the GAMSAT website, the ASA website, and the scores would pop up on like a little kind of scorecard that looked kind of like this, and it would have your score for each section and then your overall score. And I think I got to the point where I knew scores were probably coming out that day just based on, you know, timeline, and I was like hooked on Paging Doctor, and that's what everyone was saying. And the email came through. I was at home. I wasn't at uni, thank God. It was a much more chilled, less stressful experience than it would have been had I been at uni, I reckon. And I think I had like an assignment I was working on or some uni work that I had to get done that day, so I put off looking at my marks to the end of the day. I honestly don't know how I did it, but I got to the afternoon and I opened my laptop, logged in, looked at my scores, and honestly I tried to set my expectations pretty low for myself. I think I'd got into my head a little bit about, you know, the thing that happened with the essay section and getting all a bit flustered and thinking, you know, I was screwed. But I eventually opened up my results, and, you know, someone who sets generally pretty high expectations for themselves and is often disappointed, I was actually pretty stoked with my results. I remember I was pretty happy on the day. I genuinely felt like the work that I'd put in had paid off, and I'd probably gone from having a relatively modest to low chance of getting in to actually getting to the point where, you know, my GAMSAT score is pretty decent and I might have a chance here of getting in the following year. But still, you know, I remember afterwards there was lots of talk about results, people wanting to know what everyone got when I went back to uni the week after. My friends were genuinely really happy for me, and I was pretty stoked for my friends that had done well, and, you know, obviously sympathetic to the ones that didn't do as well as they hoped. You can be, you know, disappointed, you can be elated with your result, but if you're constantly thinking, you know, if I get a good result, then I'll be happy. If I get into medicine, then I'll be happy. If I get into this particular specialty, then I'll be happy. It's going to be a long journey, and I think, you know, happiness is found in things other than arbitrary scores that are handed down by exam markers and that sort of thing. I don't know, just something I'm trying to learn still. But yeah, I hope you found this video helpful, and if you did, give it a like and subscribe, join the journey, join the gang, and drop a comment below if you have any questions about the GAMSAT or about anything to do with medicine at all. Happy to answer it, and I'll see you next video. See you later.